At the height of its glory, Rome was the embodiment of absolute power. Its legions of steel didn't just march, they swept away everything in their path. From the scorching sands of North Africa across the vast plains of Europe to the impregnable fortresses of the Middle East, all fell beneath the shadow of the Roman eagle. Great kingdoms vanished one by one. Gaul, brought to its knees after hundreds of bloody battles. Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, now a storehouse of grain and gold for the empire. Judea, an ancient land of faith, bowed before the might of the legions. Even long-standing foes like the Parthians were driven back time and again, forced to hold the line on their eastern frontier. Year after year, the Senate's maps gained new swaths of red, each new province a statement that Rome could go anywhere and conquer anyone. They believed there were no limits to the empire, no land beyond their reach. But then, at the far edge of the north, where clouds wrapped around dark mountain ranges, a land emerged that shattered that belief. A place with no grand cities to seize, no throne to overthrow, no treasure to plunder. And yet, after countless costly campaigns, this land forced the mightiest empire of the ancient world to stop in its tracks. Not because Rome lacked soldiers, not because it lacked courage, but because here was a weapon they had never faced before. An unbreakable will, shielded by a harsh land and an unconventional way of war. This was the land Rome could not conquer. And this is the story of why. Rome did not expand its borders through the sword alone. They built a vast engine of conquest driven by three great gears: elite military power, a deep and calculated strategy of assimilation, and infrastructure unmatched by any civilization of its time. On the battlefield, the Roman legion was the very embodiment of iron discipline. Thousands of soldiers moved as a single unit, every step in perfect rhythm, every command executed without delay. In attack, they swept away all before them like a flood of steel. In defense, they stood immovable, like a fortress on the march. Their enemies did not face just the gleam of gladius swords and the solid wall of scutum shields. They faced a war machine honed over centuries, one that knew exactly how to crush its opponents and break their will to resist. But for Rome, conquest was only the beginning. They knew that to hold a land, they had to make it part of themselves. The defeated were offered Roman citizenship. Local elites were invited into the ruling class. Their children were sent to Rome to learn its laws, language, and culture. In territories Rome held for the long term, they built stone-paved roads, grand arenas, bustling forums, and public bathhouses, not just to display Roman power, but to bind the land into the order of the empire. In Caledonia, however, only a handful of forts, such as Inchtuthil, were begun, never completed, and later abandoned when the legions withdrew. Through this combination of force and assimilation, from Gaul to Egypt, from Judea to Hispania, lands that had once fought fiercely against Rome were eventually absorbed into the Roman world. They sent goods, gold, taxes, and even soldiers to fuel Rome's future campaigns. Every new province was not just a prize, it was a link in the vast chain that fed the very machine that had conquered it. In AD 43, that great wheel rolled across the English Channel. Southern Britannia fell quickly. Within a few decades, the land was marked by straight, stone roads, public bathhouses steaming in the misty mornings, and towns shaped in the image of Rome. To Rome, it was an inevitable victory and the perfect springboard for the next advance. Because just to the north, beyond the dark gray mountains and air that cut like a knife, lay Caledonia, a wild and unforgiving land where ancient forests choked deep valleys and black, seemingly bottomless lakes, glimmered in the shadows. The Romans believed that with a little more time and strength, this land would become yet another jewel in the crown of their empire. The Romans did not yet know. This would be the place that would test every limit of the greatest war machine in history and leave a scar that history would remember for over 2,000 years. Throughout its long history of conquest, Rome faced every kind of enemy imaginable. But in the far north, they encountered a foe against which the empire's familiar strategies were almost useless: the Caledonia, ancestors of the Picts, a name the Romans would only begin using in the 3rd century. The Picts had no cities to besiege, no capital to seize, no throne to topple. They lived in small, scattered communities deep in the wilderness, moving constantly like cold winds slipping through the northern mists. Their homes were simple, circular stone structures, built on high and rugged ground, giving them clear views in all directions and the ability to spot an enemy long before battle. Each village was a natural fortress, protected by elevation and harsh terrain, enough to make a Roman column hesitate before even making contact. Their bodies were covered with intricate tattoos and painted in deep blue dye made from native plants, blending their forms into the dark shadows of the ancient forest. In battle, they became phantoms, appearing without warning, striking with blinding speed, and vanishing back into the mist as if they had never been there at all. For Roman soldiers accustomed to seeing their enemies lined up plainly on the battlefield, this was a foe both alien and unnerving. But what made the Picts Rome's greatest nightmare was not their unusual appearance or unconventional tactics. It was a belief carved into their very being, a blunt, uncompromising declaration. We do not need Rome. They did not want Roman citizenship. They did not want the stray stone roads or the grand marble arenas. They did not want to wear the red cloak or speak the commanding tongue of Latin. They rejected everything Rome was most proud of, seeing it not as glory, but as chains. For an empire built on the ability to assimilate its enemies, turning the conquered into Romans, this was a fatal blow. You cannot bribe or reform a people who want nothing from you. The Picts did not fight to expand their territory, nor to claim imperial glory. They fought for a single principle: absolute freedom, never bowing to any power, even one that ruled half the known world. And it was that principle, not walls, not armies, that proved to be the strongest barrier Rome had ever faced. A barrier that could not be cut down by swords, could not be broken by gold, and could not be erased by time itself. Caledonia was defended not only by its people, but by the wild, untamed soul of the land itself. The rolling Grampian Mountains did not merely rise from the earth. They loomed like colossal battlements forged by the hands of nature, their jagged ridges and sheer faces standing for thousands of years as a silent challenge to any army bold enough to approach. In summer, their slopes were cloaked in dark green and shadow. In winter, they became icy ramparts, capped with snow that glittered like steel under a pale northern sun. Supply lines stalled in narrow passes. Scouts lost their bearings. Messages never reached commanders. What the mountains and forests didn't stop, the rain and fog finished, turning movement itself into a costly gamble. And in Caledonia, the storms never truly ended. Day after day, the skies opened in relentless downpours, each drop merging with the thick, suffocating fog that rolled in from the lochs and moors. The fog clung to the land like a living thing, blinding even the most experienced scouts, cutting visibility to mere paces and turning every step into a gamble. Winter did not politely arrive. It descended early and with fury, anchoring itself in the land for months on end. It carried a bone-deep cold that pierced even the finest steel armor, seeping into muscle and marrow until a man's sword arm grew sluggish, and his shield felt as heavy as stone. Breath crystallized in the air, fingers stiffened until they could barely hold a weapon, and the mere act of marching became a battle in itself. The brutal terrain turned every movement into an ordeal. Wagon wheels sank into bottomless mud, horses slipped and fell on treacherous slopes, food stores rotted in waterlogged leather packs, and the men themselves wasted away, physically and in spirit, long before they ever glimpsed the enemy. And yet, the Picts were always there, though never where Rome expected them to be. They were the flicker of motion at the tree line, the shadow slipping between rocks, the sudden strike from a place thought safe. They vanished like ghosts into the mist, flowing along hidden paths only they knew, then reappearing without warning in the least defended places, striking with speed and precision before dissolving back into the landscape as if they had never been there at all. In Caledonia, Rome was not merely fighting men, they were fighting the land itself. A land that seemed to breathe, to think, to resist. A land whose very soul stood shoulder to shoulder with its people and would rather bleed into the sea than bow to the will of a conqueror. In this land where mountains, forests, and mist formed a natural fortress, the Picts never fought the way Rome wanted them to. They did not mass their warriors in open fields, nor form neat battle lines for a direct clash. Instead, they let the Romans march deep into their territory, then turn the land itself into a vast trap, where every path, every tree, every bend in the road hid the potential for a deadly strike. By day, heavy supply convoys slogged through bogs, struggling along narrow, slippery trails, when suddenly the whistle of a spear would tear through the air from the darkness. By night, when the camps lay sleeping, the Picts were said to stir case, shouts and noises erupting from within the thick fog, only to vanish before the Romans could mount a response. The attackers left no trace, only fading torchlight and a creeping unease that spread through the ranks. Letters, orders, and reports, none reached their commanders. Scouting parties disappeared as if swallowed by the earth. Day by day, a quiet anxiety gnawed at each soldier, forcing them to sleep with one hand on the hilt of their sword. The Battle of Mons Graupius revealed this strategy in full. The Caledonians appeared on the hillsides like shadows, unleashing a rain of arrows and war cries, then melting away before Rome could deliver a decisive blow. The Romans claimed victory, boasting of thousands of enemies slain, but in truth it was an empty campaign, no cities taken, no land held, and the enemy still free to strike at will. Only weeks later, Pictish warriors reappeared somewhere else, ambushing as if they had never been defeated. Rome was accustomed to winning through overwhelming force, crushing its foes before they had time to react. But in Caledonia, they faced an enemy unbound by territory, uninterested in quick victories, and patient enough to wear them down little by little, day after day. It was a kind of war America's own history has seen, ambushes by indigenous warriors on the frontier, and battles in dense forests where the weaker side used every tree, every river bend to strip away the advantage of a stronger foe. The Picts had turned their homeland into a living ally, an unbreakable network where every hill and every wisp of mist was a weapon. In that choking fog, Rome was not just fighting men, they were fighting fleeting shadows, sudden sounds that vanished into silence, and an invisible fear tightening its grip on every soldier's mind. And eventually they realized it was not the enemy's swords or spears that were breaking them, but exhaustion and doubt, eating away from within. Years of being worn down by phantom warriors moving through the mist forced Rome to face an unprecedented truth. Caledonia was not a land that could be swallowed in a few campaigning seasons, nor an enemy that would soon bow to the might of the legions. They had tried striking fast and hard, then tried digging in for the long haul, only to discover that every step forward here was bought with blood, disease, and the slow erosion of willpower. Then something happened that had never occurred before in the history of the empire. Rome admitted to a boundary. Hadrian's Wall stretched for more than 117 kilometers, cutting across the island from sea to sea like a cold scar carved into the body of Britannia. It was not just stone upon stone, it was a bitter confession. For the first time, Rome drew a line and openly acknowledged that there was a land they would not cross. But the dream of conquest never truly died. Under Emperor Antoninus Pius, the empire tried its luck again. The Antonine Wall was built farther north, a statement that Rome still had its claws. The Antonine Wall lacked the grandeur of Hadrian's Wall, but it was a clear declaration of intent. We will advance. Yet in less than 15 years, the wall was abandoned, and the legions withdrew back to Hadrian's line, leaving the northern lands to their fog and shadow. The final and most desperate effort came under Emperor Septimius Severus. In 208, he mobilized an estimated 50,000 troops, a massive number for the unforgiving terrain of Caledonia, with one goal: annihilation. Severus did not come to negotiate nor to assimilate. He came to destroy. The legions swept forward like a storm of iron, burning villages, felling ancient forests, destroying crops. It was relentless. The land was torn apart, the whole region drowned in smoke and screams. But Caledonia did not answer with pitched battles. It fought back with the land itself. Torrential rains turned the marching routes into slick quagmires. Icy winds cut through armor like knives, and choking mists swallowed all sight, rendering maps useless. Then disease struck faster than any Pictish spear. Pneumonia, dysentery, and infections from the damp and cold. These invisible enemies crippled the Roman ranks piece by piece. Men did not die in the glory of battle, they died quietly in soaked tents, to the sound of rain and ragged fading breaths. And the Picts, they remained the same, vanishing when pursued, appearing when their enemy grew careless. There was no decisive clash, no day of triumph, only small, scattered blows that steadily wore down the will of Rome's war machine. When Severus fell ill and died at Eboracum in 211, the war died with him. No cities had been taken, no new territory gained, no emblem of victory carried back to Rome. Only a quiet withdrawal remained, carrying with it a bitter truth. There are lands that no matter how many soldiers you throw at them, no matter how much gold you spend, you will never conquer. The stones of Hadrian's Wall now bear the deep patina of time, standing in quiet defiance on windswept plains as immortal witnesses to an age when swords clashed and empires rose. Once laid with precision by the hands of Roman engineers, they now lie weathered and uneven, softened by centuries of rain, frost, and wind. Green moss creeps over their surface like nature reclaiming its own, each patch a silent testament to the storms endured. No matter how closely you listen, you will hear no echo of the legion's synchronized footsteps that once thundered across these battlements. Only the low whistle of the northern wind, carrying secrets long since swallowed by history. Beyond the wall, the primeval forests and undulating hills remain. Once alive with the pounding of war horses, the crash of shields, and the shouts of men charging into the fray. Now they lie beneath a heavy shroud of pale mist, their stillness broken only by the rustle of leaves or the distant call of a lone bird. The sounds of the past, the ring of steel on steel, the blare of war horns, the roar of 1,000 voices, have drifted away into the endless cold, leaving behind a silence so deep it feels almost sacred. Victory or defeat, borders or territory, none of it remains in any tangible form. The maps have been redrawn, the lines shifted, the banners lowered. What survives is not recorded in the brittle scrolls of Roman historians, nor in the precise measures of military reports. What endures is a story of a people too small to forge an empire, yet too resolute to be consumed by one. It is a story that whispers a truth as relevant now as it was 2 millennia ago. That true strength is not measured by how far you can push your borders, but by how fiercely you can hold to what you believe, when all the weight of the world seems determined to make you yield. Caledonia is living proof. Here, the will to remain free was itself a fortress, stronger than stone, deeper than trenches, while the land became a faithful ally, guarding its people with mountains, forests, and storms. Side by side, man and nature stood against the conqueror, and together, they endured. In Caledonia, we see the reflection of every nation that has stood on the brink of being erased from the map. It might be a small tribe hidden deep in the mountains, a young nation struggling to define itself, or even an individual in the modern world, faced with the choice between the easy road of submission and the harder path of defiance. And like the Picts, the question that truly matters for each of us is not, how strong are we, but rather, how long are we willing to stand for what we believe? Rome, the empire that crushed dozens of civilizations, absorbed distant lands into its body, and carved the map of the ancient world in blood and stone, could bend kingdoms to its will. From Gaul to Egypt, from Judea to Hispania, all eventually yielded to the shadow of the Roman eagle. But at the farthest reaches of the north, before Caledonia, the march stopped. Not because Rome's legions lacked numbers, or gold, or the iron resolve that had built their empire, but because here they faced a people who would not bow, and a land that would shelter that defiance as fiercely as if it were its own flesh and blood, no matter the cost in lives, sweat, or blood. Over 2,000 years have passed, yet the tale still lingers in the air, like the echo of a distant drum. It reminds us that not all wars are decided by strategy or force of arms. Some wars are lost before the first blow is struck, not in the clash of armies, but in the quiet surrender of the will. And sometimes, victory belongs not to the side with the larger army, but to the ones who, no matter the odds, refuse to bow. Some wars are not lost on the battlefield, but in the will of those who refuse to bow,